I make mistakes. And so if they make a mistake on my behalf, I just have to accept that and not come down on them for it. But just everyone on the podcast, think about anything you do and think about all the things that you think only you can do. And in reality, you're not being truthful because anyone else can do everything.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zengage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. All right, we are back with another episode of Home Care Hindsight. I'm joined by Jeff Salter. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, David, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar with you, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm the founder and CEO of Caring Senior Service. Originally, I spent 34 years managing and operating home care businesses. Started with a single location in West Texas, opened up 5 locations over about 11 years. And then in 2003, became a franchisor, decided to start helping other people get involved in senior care. And now I'm 34 years in the industry and continue to expand. I'm now doing some other things that I think are more about giving back to the industry and the community, home care specifically. I've really been interested in trying to look at some software solutions that help companies be better while helping Caring Senior Service. I'm also trying to help others within the space. So other home care companies get better through either software, creating new business processes, or just general advice and help any way that I can. Also involved in national level and on boards and the committees.
Yeah. I think the two things that I've learned from spending time around you is a lot about home care. You've been around the industry for a little while, at least now, but also that you're somebody who's pretty generous with your time. And so, I've appreciated our conversations and the stuff that I've learned about the industry from our interactions. What you're doing with InkyScribe is really interesting because I think you get one chance to make a first impression, and sometimes people don't have clear visibility into the kind of first impression that is being made by their business. So this whole thing isn't a sales pitch for InkyScribe or anything, but share a little bit about what you're doing because I think it's really interesting. It could help some agencies.
Yeah, that's my goal. Is as I've gotten to this point in my career, it is, while I definitely want to continue to grow within my own organization and see us thrive, I also want to see the industry rise up because I know the challenges that we're all going to be facing. So we took a look at how our people are answering the phones and tried to really look at ways we can improve that process, because when people are first calling to ask about home care, they're uninformed. They don't understand the questions they should be asking, and they need to be comforted. They need to know that the company they've called has a solution in mind. And surprisingly, as I looked at all of our locations, I found that we weren't necessarily doing that first call justice. We weren't talking to people about all the services that we could provide. We weren't being specific enough, and we weren't understanding the caller situation, be it an adult daughter looking for care for her mom, maybe a spouse calling for services for their loved one. We just weren't properly talking to them about what services are that we offer. And I thought, we can create a solution that would help with this. Initially, it was a solution that was an internal solution, and then we expanded it. Now we created a company from it, and it's purely done to help the industry. I want to see the industry rise up and see everyone be able to know what's happening in their business. And as a small business owner myself, and helping lead small business owners and advise small business owners, it's an area where it's tough to get right and it's tough to monitor. So we focused on that initial call coming into the businesses.
Yeah. The thing that stood out to me that I think is really a game changer is if there's a call that doesn't go the way it's supposed to, and your software detects that there's maybe some repair work to be done or an opportunity to get business that otherwise probably would have disappeared. If I was an agency owner, I could get a message from InkyScribe that's like, hey, this call didn't go great. Here's the details. You should give this person a call, and give an opportunity for owners to proactively step in when stuff hasn't gone well, rather than, just being either in the dark or nervous that stuff is not going the way they want it to.
Yeah, that's at the core of what InkyScribe is doing. It's taking calls, recording them, transcribing the call, what happened during the call, and then providing feedback to both the individual that took the call
Yeah.
and then their supervisor or maybe the owner of that business. And exactly what it says, it indicates, was this a new client call? And did we schedule an appointment? And if we didn't schedule an appointment, the great thing is it gives you all the information that you need to be able to call that person right back immediately, because it's all the details from that phone call are discovered and at your fingertips. Whereas in the past, you'd have to depend upon the notes that someone took, and they might not be readily available, and the notes might not be decipherable. If anyone's ever been handed a sticky note with information on it, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Perfect. Well, Jeff, thanks for being on the show. As people who listen to the show know by now, I always want to just ask people the question, what kind of person are you? And when we were doing the prep call, what came up in our conversation was you were like, well, just ask that question instead of asking some dumb question to get at it, which is fair, but also the thing that I want to do. And so I have no idea what you're going to talk about. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I definitely don't today. So Jeff, what kind of person are you?
I'm a pretty driven individual. I think I want to always be getting better. So everything that I put into the business, everything that I start working on, it's a constant improvement. So that can be pretty challenging, though. I recognize that in an organization, when you're constantly improving, means that you focus more on what you did poorly versus what you did well. So I'm not looking for perfection. I'd rather just move forward than be perfect moving forward. But I also know that I can improve no matter how well I think I did each time. And that comes from just I think it was ingrained in me. I was a track athlete in high school and in college. And that really got instilled in me early on and throughout those many, many years of being coached.
Yeah. And I have in my notes something bike ride.
Yeah. So part of that, trying to get better and trying to improve, when we got to our 30-year anniversary as a business, and, a great moment. Not a lot of people can say that they've been at the start of their company, were the founder, and lasted for 30 years. Many people either they might fail or they might just eventually move on to something else. I've stuck with it. I'm celebrating 30 years, almost 4 years ago now. And for my celebration for 30 years, I wanted to do something that was to touch each and every location. By that point, we had almost 50 locations, and I wanted to go visit every single location. And typically, a CEO would maybe get in a plane. Yeah. They might drive to those locations, depending on how close they are. But ours are spread across the nation. So we had locations from the West Coast to the East Coast, all points in between. And almost as a dare, one of the guys that I work with said, Jeff, you've been getting into your electric bikes more. You've been riding it to and from work about 20 miles each way. He said, you should ride your bike to every location. And I was like, dude, that's the craziest, dumbest idea I've ever heard. But I went home that night and thought, what would it take to ride a bike to every single location? So on April 1st of 2021, I got on an electric bike and spent 4 months on the road visiting every single location. At the end of the trip, I basically circumnavigated the U.S., went from the center here in San Antonio out to the East Coast, up the Eastern Seaboard, all the way back across to California, and then back to San Antonio over 4 months and 9,500 miles, visiting every location, having celebrations. And it was important. We wanted to celebrate, and that was the main driver of the discussion. But as we started really thinking about what we were going to do, we decided to create a movement. And that movement was called Close the Gap in Senior Care. We've now since created a nonprofit. And our goal during the ride was to raise money for grab bars. We wanted to install grab bars in seniors' home. I'm happy to say that we raised $170,000. Wow. We've installed grab bars in over 400 seniors' home, in seniors that would have normally not been able to afford a grab bar in their home. And we put them in the bathroom because that's the place where most falls happen. Falls are devastating to seniors when they occur. Leading cause of death, accident-related deaths, is falls. And so it was great. It was a great way to spread the word about senior care, help people understand, this guy riding a bike, why are you riding this bike? I was able to share with them what I was doing and raise money and then give back in a really unique way. And at the same time, celebrate 30 years of business. So it was a really cool thing to do. And I was excited to have done it and get the chance to share with people, the many stories of that trip.
Yeah. Part of me wants to just derail the entire rest of this podcast episode and just talk about that trip. Maybe that's another time. I have a friend with a full suspension electric mountain bike. And so he and I will ride together sometimes. I have a hardtail bike and it's got no rear suspension and no battery. And so I'm normally just huffing to try and keep up. But there was one time we went, he'd not really charged it. And so that battery's super heavy. And so it goes from being something that helps you to something that weighs like 35 pounds that's just on the bike frame. So did you ever have any issues with the charge, or did you keep that thing up and ready to go?
I get a lot of grief. I tell people I want this 9,500 mile bike ride. And sometimes when I tell people it's an electric bike, they're like, oh, it's an electric bike. Anybody can do that. Well, sure. The trip, I had a companion rider with me. We did it all unsupported, which means you don't have a chase vehicle. You're going out and you have to figure your own way the whole time. But we did have a companion rider. So I had someone that would fly into a city. They'd get on the bike. They'd go for a week or so and then get off the bike. And the next guy would fly in, kind of switch them out. About half of the journey, it was that situation. I did half of it solo. Well, the person that was coming in, it was most of the guys I worked with, had both my sons at one point in time, my business partner, different times. Each and every one of them thought, oh, it's an electric bike, no big deal, I can do this. But what they failed to realize that you're on the bike we were traveling between 80 and 120 miles every single day. So you had to sit on a bike going 15 miles an hour type of max speed. And it's grueling to sit on a bike for 7 to 9 hours every single day. It's tough. And it's a lot of exercise because the battery only takes you so far on its own. If you're not putting energy in as far as pedaling, then you'll only go about 20, 30 miles pure battery power. On top of that, we had gear. A normal bike someone rides is a 10 to 15 pound bike. So you're moving that thing, no problem. An electric bike often weighs with the battery, and the frame has to be heavier. And we were riding fat tire bikes, so it made it even more heavy. The bike at the start is about 70 pounds. So you've got to just move 70 pounds. So if you don't have a battery and motor, so it turns it into a normal bike. But then we loaded gear on top of that. I was pulling a trailer that had 100 pounds of gear in it. I had about 70 pounds of gear on the bike itself. Because again, you're traveling. You had to bring everything with you that you needed. I camped out during a lot of trips. So it was a lot. Battery management and battery usage was paramount to the entire trip. And there was only one case in which the battery died and we had to kind of pedal that thing. And you can imagine pedaling a regular bike with gear is a challenge, but you put a 100-pound trailer behind it and then you put 70 pounds on the bike, it doesn't go very fast at all and it's grueling. So luckily it only happened once. I managed the usage quite well for most of it. And you do 9,500 miles, you kind of figure a lot of things out along the way.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, placeholder for another episode that's just about the trip, because I could talk to you about that all day. But I didn't bring you on the podcast to talk about all your success or the bike trip and the success that was. Instead, I bring people on the show and I ask them about a big mistake they've made in their career and all the stuff that they learned from that. So, Jeff, what's your big mistake?
It's always a challenge for any of us that have had any level of success to kind of pick the mistake that they made. And if we're being honest, there's lots of mistakes along the way. I'm going to relate back to the bike ride, and it's not necessarily as much as a big mistake as it is with more not giving an understanding that we all need more help. We all can use help along the way. Someone who's entrepreneurial and you're driven, you think that you need to make all the decisions. You need to take the reins and move forward. For me, one of the challenges that I faced my entire career is not accepting other people's help. And the journey on the bike ride was something that helped me understand that you need help. You take help when it's offered and you get assistance. And that's been something early on in my career I didn't pay attention to. I didn't ask for help when I probably needed it. And it would have been a much easier path had I just said, hey, can you help me with this? I'm struggling here. I would oftentimes more struggle than just ask for help and get the help that I needed and get to the solution quicker, but frequently would just go it alone. So I think, from a perspective, I don't know if that answers your big mistake question or not, but for me, there's plenty that were made because I didn't ask for help.
Yeah. As I think, I'm a terrible delegator, and I'm in the process of having to learn how to delegate because we're busy and we're growing, but it means I can't do everything like I could a year ago. And so, as I'm thinking through this in kind of my own life and work, I think there's a couple of reasons people don't delegate. The first is they're like, I hate this task. Everybody else probably has to hate this task, but I'm the guy in charge. And so I just got to eat the frog and do the thing and be miserable, but whatever. And in reality, like there's people who love the tasks that you hate, and it's right in line with their personality. And so I'm curious, like, what were the tasks that you didn't ask for help with that you should have? And then I think my follow-up question to that is going to be like, who were the people that were kind of waiting in the wings and that you could have tapped or activated to get into the business and help, but you kind of overlooked their potential to make an impact? So what are the tasks, and then who are the people?
Again, it's going to go back to the bike ride, so it kind of becomes a theme in my life here lately. But if you're going to leave your business, everyone asks me, so how did you work during the 4 months you were gone? You know, you're running a multi-million-dollar organization. How can you just be gone from that? Well, I had to spend time really organizing what my work was and then handing that off to other people. And that process actually taught me that I'm not as important as I think I was, because the tasks that I thought were menial and I could just do, or that I like what you said about I hate this task so much. Why would I give this task to someone else? Yeah. That's like punishing people. And I learned that exactly what you said. Other people actually like those tasks, and they found them to be rewarding in some way, shape, or form, or it didn't bother them as much as I thought it would bother them. They were able to take that task on. But it's all the simple things. When you're going to be gone, and we're not talking a vacation for a week. And
right.
You know, some people take vacation for 2 weeks and they're like, okay, I've gone 2 weeks. All that usually happens is their work just stacks up. When they get back, they finish all those things. For me, I had to go and delegate everything and teach other people, because I was not going to be able to do that. I would either be unavailable completely because I was remote in the wilderness at times. And again, people don't realize most of us ride a bike, we go on a little tour, maybe go around town. Very few people have gotten a chance to get on a bicycle and ride to the next city. And then imagine that city is somewhere you've never been before, ride to a place that's completely unknown. So you don't know what you're getting into. You don't know if you're going to be with service, without service. So there were like 3-4 days where I didn't have any connectivity. I couldn't log on to the internet. I couldn't access. I had a computer with me. When I had connection, I could do work, but I had to account for the fact that there could be something important needed to get done and other people would have to do it. So pretty much everything that I did in day to day, I had to let someone else take that on, give them the instruction of how to complete it. And then the next thing was to let go, willing to let go, and someone making a mistake on my behalf. You know, that's kind of the toughest one for people to do. Like, I don't want to let someone else make a mistake that's going to harm me. And for me, it was a matter of like, well, I have to accept that that's going to happen. I make mistakes. And so if they make a mistake on my behalf, I just have to accept that and not come down on them for it. You know, just everyone on the podcast, think about anything you do and think about all the things that you think only you can do. And in reality, you're not being truthful, because anyone else can do everything.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
You've had, it sounds like, plenty of experience with delegating. Somebody doesn't do it exactly right, makes a mistake, whatever. How do you as a leader have that kind of conversation? Because I think like maybe one of the reasons that people have a hard time delegating is that kind of future anxiety about, oh, it's going to be this whole thing where I have to like criticize someone's performance or come down on them or be disappointed in them. And that feels like a whole kind of Gordian knot that's hard to get at.
Yeah, people smarter than me have written entire books on this subject, haven't they? And for me, it's a matter of just the one thing I have a lot of is confidence. Sometimes it's borderline egotistical in some aspects. I'll fully admit, but I do have a lot of confidence, and I also know that anything that gets broken, I can probably fix. And I also know that I break plenty of things that I have to fix. So I just keep that attitude whenever I delegate to someone else, that if they break it, it's going to be because I did not properly tell them how to deal with the outlier situations. And they probably couldn't have done any different, and they did the best that they could. Those combined things, knowing that I could probably fix it and knowing that that I probably didn't instruct them, has guided me to then have those conversations in a much better way than maybe I would have in my early career. And when you're informed and understand that, then you kind of have a different conversation. Like, oh man, you made the mistake in what I delegated to you. You pushed the wrong button.
Yeah. But
I actually didn't tell you that in that case, you pushed the other button.
Right.
And that's on me. Let's fix it and move on. Now they're a little bit more educated. They know a little bit more. That mistake won't happen. But there's always going to be outlier situations that we can't prepare people for. And we just have to accept that now, this is assuming that they're conscientious. They're doing the best they can. They took action based upon a set of known decision-making criteria, and they didn't just not do it at all. So that's something you got to make sure. And those are tougher conversations when someone's actually failing and they had all the knowledge they needed.
And then, you have cultivated some folks within your organization, not just to like be the person who can push the button instead of you, but to also be a strategic thinker and, be responsible not just for executing on a plan, but also conceptualizing the plan. And that's a much different level of responsibility and delegation and training and stuff. And so if I'm a home care owner who's got a couple of people who I trust to push the buttons, whether that's like preparing the payroll report or doing the schedule or doing the recruiting, how do you go about identifying maybe one of those people or maybe somebody from outside the organization who can come in as more of a strategic leader who can actually kind of like impact a part of the business and its strategy somewhat independently?
Yeah, I think it's a little tougher in that area just to identify that person. And in the end, we can all identify them, but then we actually got to give them the ability to make those decisions. And I think it's more project-based, and you have to start off with, think about some areas of business you want to change and have them think through and come back to you with some ideas. And hopefully you're in the mode where you're able to, because it's easier for all of us to make someone else's idea better versus to come up with that idea from scratch. So that's actually the toughest part. And so if you kind of take that approach of like, let me give you some things that will make this even better, then they can learn from that versus being someone that you expected to be perfect when it comes to you, because that's a developed skill as well, especially if it's in an area where they're not used to making those decisions or having the opportunity to make those decisions. We've all got to learn somewhere, and failure, unfortunately, is a way we often learn. And I think that the term of fail fast is important. Figuring out what went wrong and then correcting it quickly. But you got to let people have that opportunity. You got to give the reins over, tell them to solve the problem and think through this strategically, so that you can come and add your value to it. Each one of us has our own flavor to the way we think and operate. And it's what makes us special. But sometimes you're seldom going to recreate it. So you got to understand that going in.
Yeah. I like that idea of giving them a project with a defined scope of, hey, here's something in the business I've wanted to change anyways, but kind of haven't had the time or bandwidth to do. And so here's some initial ideas. Go crazy, come back to me with like what you found and some recommendations, and let's kind of work on implementing it from there. Yeah. And then, you've kind of compartmentalized the scope of the project, made it more manageable. But also, if it doesn't go great, you haven't blown up the entire business. You've just impacted one particular area of it.
You've got to give people the runway to make that decision and take that task on, because oftentimes we'll talk about things that are often considered sacred cows. So the ways we've been operating always, I've always done it that way. Why would I change it? You've got to be the one as the owner oftentimes say, let's look at that and make this more efficient, more effective. Let's make it better. Because otherwise people think, oh, it's just the way we do things, and they don't not supposed to touch it. But the owner has to be the one who says, yeah, let's look at it. I try and tell everyone in my company, there is no sacred cow. Even though we believe strongly in the way that we operate and what we're doing, if there is a better way and we can look at it, then you should be the one coming forward and talking about those things.
That's great. All right, we're going to move to another segment where I ask you about something that you think is totally overrated in the industry. Everybody thinks it's great. It gets talked about a lot. It's kind of the shiny object, but you don't think it's actually nearly as good as it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's I'm going to say data is overrated, but I got to qualify that in the fact that I think other people's data and using that data to make decisions on your business is where it's often overrated. My example for this is close rate. People often want to cite, what's your close rate? And that's the rate of between how many calls for new service do you get versus how many admissions do you get? And there's kind of two measurements people do. They measure that one, calls to admissions, but then they also measure appointments. How many appointments did you end up making based upon the calls coming in? And we usually, when we make an appointment, the industry I think falls in line here and says, okay, we more times than not land that client if we get in front of that client. But the tendency is for the industry to use statistics that are provided to us through various sources. And I just think that's you're chasing the wrong number when you're chasing someone else's close rate. And your close rate is your close rate. You're in complete control of that. It should only be something you measure internally. You should try to improve it, of course, but you need to, first of all, make sure you're measuring it properly. That's why we just created InkyScribe also we knew that more calls were coming in than we were documenting and showing. So first of all, we have to know all of our numbers. We have to know how many actual calls did we get, whether or not the caller became a client or not, whether or not they even knew they were calling the right number is almost immaterial. They dialed your phone number for some reason. They might have misunderstood what service you provide. But what we found is more frequently people call us and they just don't know the right question to ask. So if you're only logging the calls of the informed callers, then you're not really counting your close rate properly. And if you're following someone else's statistics and they're not following those rules and you're chasing their number, well, you're chasing a ghost number. It's not true. So for me, overrated is other people's data, other people's statistics. I think it's something internally. You should know those numbers, your key performance indicators, whatever you want to call them. You just need to know exactly how do I measure them and how do I improve based on my measurement. Consistent measuring, consistent review, and then taking actions to make adjustments. But that's true for, I look at close rate, I look at that. The other one's retention rates often cited in the industry. And I think It's just dependent on your system and what you're doing. That we should all just know our own statistics and follow those. And when you compare yourself to anyone else, you got to ask a gazillion questions to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I think it's, there's so many variables that go into the kind of publicly available statistics. There's payer profile. What's the kind of going rate for bill rate in the area? What are you able to pay as a result of that? Are you paying at the top of your market, at the bottom of your market? What other practices do you have in terms of retention? And so I think instead measuring and saying, okay, what's the one thing we can do this quarter that's going to make a measurable difference on our retention rate or on our close rate or whatever the case may be, and then measure, hey, did that thing that we did make a difference on our close rate? Great, moved the business forward, unlocked some revenue potential or some cost savings or whatever. Let's make another tweak and see what the impact is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of people using their own number. You can compare yourself to someone else as long as you know that they're recording the data the same way that you're recording the data.
Yeah, there's a kind of umbrella question here of methodology. Are the publicly available numbers, are they collecting those numbers through the same methodology that you think about close rate and retention rate and all that kind of stuff within your business? And if yes, then great, maybe that's a useful number. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people going into that process. So I think we talk a lot about, I always think about, we talk a lot about 90-day retention as a success metric in caregivers. And I wonder if the reason we focus on 90-day retention so much as kind of the cornerstone of our recruitment practices is just because that's the thing that we're measuring. What's to say that 64-day retention isn't the magic number, that if you keep them to 64 days, you'll also keep them to 90 days. But if you don't keep them to 64 days, that's like the critical event. So that's something I think about a lot is like, are the metrics that we pay attention to really the meaningful metrics, or are they the metrics that we've been measuring for long enough that they've just become what people reference?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think they use what everyone else says they should be using, and they try and then decide are they meeting the industry standard or not. But the retention question is something we could spend a whole podcast talking about that number itself, because I'm highly opinionated in that area, and I just think that there's too many factors that go on that you have to review to say, can you impact that number? And it's impossible to come up with a standard, I feel like, in this industry without looking at all of the other factors. Number of shifts offered, length of shifts, desire of that person, what they were trying to get to hours-wise. I think there's some of the studies that came out talking about just the profile of your typical caregiver. I think there's so many people out there looking for work now in different ways that we're using a standard that is based upon, if you're hiring only career caregivers and they're making a decision to work for one company and not jump around, what's your retention rate then? Which I think is difficult to put everyone into that kind of category.
Yeah. We think a lot in the language of preventable turnover versus non-preventable turnover, because there's always going to be instances where that turnover was inevitable. No solution that's promising to make an impact on turnover, on retention, et cetera, is the silver bullet that's going to get you to zero. And I think everybody listening to this knows that that's the case. And so the question for us is always, what's the cause of that preventable turnover that we can impact in a meaningful way? And a lot of times, scheduling is this kind of fixed point of, if we don't have a client for you, it's going to be hard for us to put you to work. But there's this kind of second layer that is, a lot of times the communication about the schedule is what's missing. And if there's clear lines of communication and there's clear expectations about timeline, a lot of times you can keep somebody engaged for long enough that you can catch up and get them a client and get them across the finish line. And so even though scheduling is always going to be an impact on turnover and is going to kind of fall into that category of non-preventable turnover, there's this layer of communication and engagement above that you can actually make, a big difference on. And so that's just one example of scheduling is always hard, but if you have the right kind of communication practices around your scheduling, there's an opportunity to impact that retention figure.
I tell people, if you're a good employer, you're paying fair wages, you're offering regular shifts, your people are kind. Mm-hmm. They're respectful to caregivers. They truly show the appreciation. Like I tell everyone that works for me, I don't own a single thing, David, that is not derived from the work of a caregiver. I mean, I've been doing this since I was 20, so I didn't have a chance to work in some other career, bring all of that wealth and experience to this. I've been since I was 20, so I don't own a single thing in my life that's not derived from the work of a caregiver. So I have this appreciation for caregivers in a way that sometimes other people don't have. So I speak of them and to them in a way that might be different than a lot of other people. But if you're doing those, if you're a good person, you've got a good team member, you've got a good offering to caregivers, then I think that's something that you'll have success. And one of the things, back to talk about InkyScribe for a second, is what we were able to do is now we're able to record and transcribe and analyze those calls. So we can tell when we think we're being good to our caregivers and we discover that actually we're not talking to them the way that we thought we should be. They're not following that model. And my staff is being short with a caregiver. My staff is saying words that they shouldn't be saying during those quick calls to caregivers that we spent a ton of money putting an ad. We've had hours of interview time by somebody involved to get them to the point where they're just ready to go to work. Now, I haven't even put that person to work yet. I might have, if I have training that has to happen for that caregiver that they do beforehand, I've now invested all these dollars. And so there's a lot of money tied up in just getting someone to the point where you can schedule them to a shift. And then if the team members that are working around you aren't treating those people in a way that is very respectful, truly like a family member or like a team member, and they're not doing this, then you've just wasted all that money, because that person's, unless they're desperate and they only need the job to work, which some people are, and they're like, hey, I need pay, so I'll deal with this crappy attitude. But it's such a better scenario whenever we treat them fairly, we treat them with respect, we talk to them in a way that's more akin to this conversation you and I are having than what I've heard through the use of InkyScribe oftentimes can happen is just a quick, rude, oh, what do you mean you're not going to cover that shift? Okay, I got to cover it. And, we all know people can lie. They can make up a story, but let's give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume that they're telling us the truth. Even though we might know their grandmother has passed away 7 times now. We have to be able to say, okay, understand, no problem, just talk to people properly. And that's been enlightening with this product to be able to say, hey, we can actually hear that happening. We can spot it because it's identifying those situations, and then we can do corrective action so we know we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, let's move on to we talked about a big mistake that you've made in your career, but what's a little mistake that you see home care owners make all the time that if they stopped, it'd make their lives or their businesses 10 times better?
I think it's back to that delegating. There's too many owners that think that they're the only ones that can do certain tasks, and they don't delegate those tasks to somebody else so they can focus on the more important things. I'm guilty of it still today. I don't want to sit here and say I've figured out delegating, and there's lots of things that I like to do because I enjoy them and I don't want to hand them off. But just because I like to do them and I enjoy them doesn't mean I should be the one doing it. It actually gets in the way of me being more productive. And I need to move those off my plate into someone else's. And I have to become a bottleneck because of some of those things. You can only move through me. Therefore, if I'm not around and available because I'm maybe the owner or the top manager, then it kind of stifles other people's ability to move things through. And that it might sound like could also be a big mistake, but I think there's a lot of little things people are doing that they probably shouldn't be, and they think that it's because they're either the only ones that can do it or should do it. So I'm gonna stay with that today on the delegating part.
Yeah. Do you have some kind of orienting questions for if I'm, we're recording this on December 16th, it'll come out in January sometime. If people are thinking kind of, okay, my New Year's resolution is to delegate better, are there some orienting questions as they're thinking through the stuff that they do on a day-to-day basis? Like, how do we identify the stuff that's going to be either easiest to do or highest impact to do if they delegate that and find the right person to take that task on?
It's kind of the same process I would use. I've been on last few years, been on automation kick. So I'm trying to automate a lot of different things. I think it's the same process. And automation, you look for what's the highest value thing that I can automate. Usually the highest value thing is what's taking the most amount of time when you stack it together. So someone does a task 3 times a day. It takes 10 minutes every single day. That's 30. Let's say it's 30 minutes, 10 minutes each task, 3 times a day. It's 30 minutes a day. That might not seem like a lot. And they'll tell you, no, it's no problem. It's 30 minutes of my day. Yeah. Well, when you add that up times 5 and add that up times the total number of work days in a year, it's a lot of hours that are being spent doing that task. Same thing for delegating. Just look at how much time it's taking you. And is it something you can teach someone else? Can you write it down? Can you give that steps to someone else? And I go from delegating to automating pretty quickly. And if you do the delegating part really well, you can actually move it to automating to where you actually get rid of the task entirely. So those two things are kind of hand in hand for me. So it's really just how much time is it taking from you to do it? Of course, there's certain things that bring us joy, and we all have to find joy in work. Yeah. So if I like doing that task, then maybe you shouldn't hand it off. But you got to analyze it. Like, is it taking too much of your time? Do you have something else you could do that would be better spent? And that's the other side of that argument is, what things would I like to be doing that could bring value to the organization that I don't feel like I have time to? And hopefully there's something there that's so compelling that says, gosh, if I do this one thing over here, it's going to be transformative for our company. So that's something that people you can really think about and try to do as they start off their new year.
Yeah, I think that's really good wisdom. And I think kind of the thing to think about is, what are the things I wish I had time to do, but I don't? And that can be a good kind of, not just let me get this off my plate so that I don't have to be stressed by it and somebody else's problem, but instead, like, what are the things that I could be doing that only I can do, but that I don't have time to do right now because tasks that somebody else could probably take care of? Well, let's move now to the win of the week. We've talked about a lot of mistakes, but I always like to end every episode on a high note of hearing about something that's happened lately in your business that you're really proud of.
This is a tough one for me. It goes back to that perfectionist comment. Not that I'm a perfectionist, but I'm always wanting to improve. So I don't spend a lot of time looking at my wins. I look at what I did and could improve. Again, take that back from a career in track and field. And I was a hurdler, high jumper, long jumper. So I thrived on being told what I could improve, because I knew my time, I knew my distance, I knew my height. That was part of the event itself. But what I didn't know is what I did wrong during the jump, maybe.
Yep.
Didn't know what I did wrong going over the hurdle. So I wanted to. And so the wins for me are a little tougher. I will say that I'm really proud. We've been expanding as a company at Caring Senior Service, been expanding as a company, adding locations. That's been good. Just last week we signed on another location. So that's an improvement. InkyScribe continues to grow as a company. We split that off and became its own company. So we've seen new clients come on board there every week. So that's kind of a win. I suppose that's what everyone expects. Saying a win is like signing up a new client. May not be a big win, but I think for me that was pretty good. But from a personal perspective, I just had both my sons graduate from A&M University last week on Thursday and Friday. So that was a personal win, not necessarily business-wise. But it's going to turn into business because they're both coming to work with me. So
yeah, that's a unique recruitment strategy. So everybody listening, you can just have children, and in 18 to 20 to 22 years, you'll have maybe an employee. Yeah. Well, Jeff, thanks for engaging in that character development exercise for you. You got to celebrate the wins sometimes. And then before we go, where can people find you? What would you like to plug?
Yeah, easy to get a hold of me. Just go to caringseniorservice.com or now InkyScribe.com, both places. Jeff Salter. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jeff Salter. CEO and founder of Caring Senior Service. So pretty easy. Email me, text me, any of the available ways to contact someone. I'm available.
That sounds great. Well, Jeff, thanks for coming on the show today. Really enjoyed the conversation. Excited to bring you back for the just the bike trip episode.
I look forward to that, David. Thanks. It's been great being on board on today.
Awesome. Jeff, thanks so much for making the time today. This was really good. On behalf of the team here at Zengage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zengage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.